After creating the most successful animated comedy of all time, naturally there were question marks surrounding Matt Groening's next project. Whatever he created surely had to be a step down in some way. But in 1999 he served up Futurama, an unexpectedly wholesome comedy series set in the year 3000. The characters were distinctive, the storytelling was airtight, and the jokes were fresh. Somehow he had hit another home run. But Futurama had a strange broadcasting trajectory and is very much a show of chapters. It initially ran on Fox for 4 of its strongest seasons, then took a 5-year hiatus before running on Comedy Central for another 5 years, then took a 10-year hiatus before being greenlit once again by Hulu. Since its inception, Futurama was held up as the best animated sci-fi comedy series ever made. But that was an easy position to maintain, as there wasn't exactly stiff competition. But in 2013, just as Futurama was finishing its second run, Rick and Morty exploded onto our TV screens. It wasn't exactly wholesome, but it was a dark, twisted, meta take on the genre, a semi-reimagining of Back to the Future. The show rightly attracted a large audience of loyal viewers, and due to the timing of its release, seemed to eclipse Futurama in terms of its cultural impact, at least online. But the series would suffer its own controversies, causing its lead voice actor and co-creator to step down after 6 seasons. In both series, fans tend to regard the first 4 seasons as the strongest, but both shows are funny, both shows are distinctive, and both shows have highly creative storytelling. But if you could only recommend one of them to someone who's never seen an animated sci-fi comedy series, which one would you choose? Yes, you might like both, but when push comes to shove and the chips are down, with a gun to your head and other such metaphors, which one is the better series? Let's explore the ultimate cartoon contest. This is Futurama vs. Rick and Morty, an admittedly completely unnecessary battle for the best animated sci-fi comedy series ever made. Now, before starting, I'll transparently admit that I have warm childhood memories of watching Futurama. That means that I probably possess some biases in favour of the show that Rick and Morty fans can use to discredit me if and when I ever choose against them. But I promise I will try to be as objective as I can, as I genuinely do love both shows in different ways and for different reasons. The winner will be judged over 5 categories: premise, unique style of comedy, heart, action, and sci-fi storytelling, where episodes with similar sci-fi tropes and themes will be judged head-to-head. Let's start with premise. Futurama tells the story of Fry, a delivery boy from the year 2000 who accidentally falls into a cryogenic freezer and wakes up 1,000 years later. So we have one character from our time who we can relate to, arriving in this new world with so much to discover. He gets a job working for his elderly great-great-great-nephew, Professor Farnsworth, lives with his new robot best friend Bender, and has a love interest with a one-eyed mutant named Leela, alongside the rest of the crew, who all have very fun, identifiable personalities that open up a wide net of potential storylines. Whereas Rick and Morty is kind of the inverse. The show takes place in the present day, but unlike the rest of the world, which is continuing as normal, in the Smith household, their grandfather Rick happens to be an alcoholic intergalactic genius that pulls his family, specifically his grandson Morty, into a series of adventures in different galaxies, dimensions, and timelines. So of the two, I would say that Rick and Morty has the more novel premise that's harder to pull off. Whereas Futurama's setup is a bit more by the book. However, Futurama's premise makes its universe and cast of characters more expansive, which allows the storylines to flow more naturally as they could come from any direction. Think about it, almost all of Rick and Morty's storylines have to come through Rick. He's not only the catalyst, but also who the viewers as well as the family rely on to explain what's even happening every step of the way. So while this makes Rick a more impactful protagonist than anyone in Futurama, he's also a more exhausting one, as Futurama's setup allows for the ball to be passed to any of the crew members to carry their own episode, which creates a more fun and diverse style of storytelling. And although Rick's adventures are undeniably engrossing, Fry has a richer backstory and connection to the past, which allows the viewer to relate to how out of place their own frame of reference would be in this futuristic world. And Futurama even plays with the details of our own present world and how they would naturally progress into the future. Whether it's our pollution coming back to bite us, or the episode where Fry goes to his old bank account and discovers he's now a billionaire due to compound interest over 1,000 years. So although both have strong premises, Futurama narrowly wins this category due to its wider scope and relatability. But then we come to the style of comedy. Although Futurama has some dark comedic elements, it's generally more wholesome and family-focused humour. You can tell it's the same creator as The Simpsons. The jokes always stem from the characters, who each symbolise different traits. Whether it's stupidity, elderliness, obsessed with food, arrogance, anxiousness, a rule keeper, or a rule breaker. This makes Futurama's style of comedy highly relatable, as it's covering the full scope of human flaws. No one is perfect. They all have their pitfalls and defects, which generate unexpectedly hilarious interactions. But Rick and Morty came in with the disadvantage of going second and still managed to create a more unique brand of comedy. Yes, it slightly overdoes its meta humor, but it is willing to go to darker places in its storytelling, which opens up a whole new world of adult comedy. Futurama is more about the crew's interpersonal dynamics and watching how they react in new environments. Whereas Rick and Morty is all about the family being thrown into an absurd scientific problem because of Rick, whether it be due to his inventions or his enemies creating inventions to trick him, such as secretly imprisoning them in a simulation within a simulation to extract valuable information, or novel aliens infiltrating our world, like parasites implanting themselves into cherished memories so they can slowly take over the planet. These episodes allow for a style of comedy that has simply never been seen before, and while Rick and Professor Farnsworth are both scientists, Rick's inventions just feel far more creative. As unlike Farnsworth, who usually creates a simple device with a simple effect, Rick's inventions tend to come with a specific defect that then spirals out of control. For example, Mr. Meeseeks, a blue creature whose sole purpose is to help each family member achieve their stated goal, who can only disappear once you've succeeded. Then when Jerry tries to set a humble target, like taking 2 strokes off his golf game, he accidentally proves he's still too incompetent to achieve even that, causing each blue creature to summon their own Mr. Meeseeks to help them achieve their goal of helping Jerry, until the whole population of Mr. Meeseeks now have to observe and pile pressure onto Jerry as he continues to fail over and over. So although both shows are hilarious, Rick and Morty has earned this point. Next up is heart. This category is simpler to judge, as while Rick and Morty does have its emotional moments, it's usually stimulated more by the director's musical choices than it is from the sentimentality of its storytelling. Rick and Morty is dark, its main character has seen too much and is therefore cynical. He's not sentimental, he's not even sensitive or empathetic, which, don't get me wrong, can be funny, but leaves you with a much colder feeling about the reality of the universe and by extension, your place in it. Its take-home message is that love isn't real, everything is pointless, and ultimately nothing matters.
Nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die.
Whereas Futurama expresses the idea that everyone matters. We all have a part to play in the universe, whether we realize it or not. That even Fry, an otherwise dumb delivery boy, could be the savior of the universe due to his unique history. It also has an ongoing love story that develops throughout the series, not only demonstrating that love is possible, but that it's intrinsic to being alive. Rick and Morty's characters don't really have much of a backstory. Sure, Jerry and Beth have a dicey marriage, but for the most part they all just live together and are thrust into obscene intergalactic situations. Whereas in Futurama, Fry has lost everyone and everything he ever knew. As much as he gained from going to the future, it came at a cost. And that theme is consistently explored through flashback episodes, such as The Luck of the Fryrish, where Fry chases after his old 7-leaved clover, believing his brother had not only stolen his luck, but his identity and his dreams. Only to discover in reality, his brother missed him so much that he named his first son after his long-lost brother, and he grew up to be a space explorer. This highlights the impact Fry had on the world, even in his absence, a theme that was also explored in the devastating episode Jurassic Bark, where Fry wants to reanimate his old dog Seymour, but then changes his mind at the last second when he discovers that his cherished pet lived for another 12 years after he was frozen. Fry then has to accept that while he may remember him, Seymour probably forgot about him a long time ago. But the show then reveals the tragic truth, that Seymour waited outside Fry's pizza place every day for the rest of his life, pining for his best friend to return, but he never did. So there's really no contest here. Futurama gets the point. But similarly, action is also a one-sided contest. While Futurama does have some fun adventure moments, its action is pretty generic. The show is more about what the characters are doing on board the ship than it is about the thrill of the chase. But by contrast, Rick and Morty can feel like an adrenaline shot to the heart. It's all about pace, narrow escapes, and outthinking your opponents against the clock. While Futurama has some visual battles, in the end it's a family show. The violence is pretty minimal. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does restrain the depth the action can go. However, Rick and Morty prides itself on its unflinching levels of violence. When we were talking about heart, what the show loses in one hand, it recaptures in the other. As by lacking almost all forms of sentimentality and showcasing the ugly side of human nature, you can really create some thrilling, action-packed episodes with no holds barred. For instance, Rick will travel to other dimensions and kill a whole host of living creatures just for fun. And if the main characters end up dying, they can just be respawned or shift to a near-identical universe and simply continue on that timeline instead. So while the show may communicate that nothing matters, nothing mattering also opens you up to a lot of nihilistic fun. The point goes to Rick and Morty, making it all to play for in the final category, sci-fi storytelling. There are so many ways to judge what makes one show better than the other. For some, they would say Rick and Morty's best 5 episodes trump Futurama's best 5 episodes. Therefore, Rick and Morty is a better show. For others, they'll say that Futurama is more consistent and has more strong episodes. Therefore, Futurama is the better show. Both arguments have their merits, but let's see which show comes out the winner when we look at how they deal with certain sci-fi tropes and how much they manage to achieve in a single episode. Let's start with the pilot episode to see how each show sets up its universe. Now, pilot episodes are a strange thing, as they have to be filled with so much exposition and setup while still being entertaining enough for the viewer to want to come back for more. In Futurama's pilot, it opens with 2 minutes of setting the scene, that Fry is miserable in his old life with a crummy job and a girlfriend who's cheating on him. Therefore, when he's frozen for 1,000 years, he understandably embraces this as an opportunity, establishing the fun tone that being in the future is an adventure our hero wants to go on. We then get to explore this new world, following Fry as he naively almost kills himself and desperately tries to avoid getting his designated job implant as he doesn't want to be a delivery boy for the rest of his life. We get introduced to Leela as a love interest and Bender as a best friend, before Fry gets a job from the professor and ultimately accepts his new job implant as an interplanetary delivery boy. It's pretty well rounded, quickly establishing the characters and the types of jokes we can expect from each of them moving forward.
Morty, you gotta, come on. You gotta come with me.
What, Rick? What's going on?
Rick and Morty open strong. We have the grandfather Rick drunkenly waking up his grandson and dragging him on a space adventure. A situation that would seem so insanely odd to us, but it's being established as commonplace to Morty. Essentially, Rick is drunk driving in space, and Morty has to stop him. While this is a gripping way to start the show, it doesn't really set up their dynamic, as Rick is ultimately the competent one between the two. We then get introduced to the family dynamic at the dinner table, with Rick disrespecting Jerry and easily manipulating Beth, and we discover Morty has a crush on Jessica at school. Then as Morty is being bullied, Rick appears and pulls him on yet another crazy adventure. So we're learning that Rick is relentlessly distracting from any semblance of a normal life. They teleport to another dimension because Rick needs powerful seeds for his experiments, essentially using his grandson as his drug mule, triggering a wacky series of events where Morty ends up consistently hurt and traumatized before they return home. Admittedly, both shows have a strong opening episode, establishing interpersonal dynamics and introducing key characters. However, I would say that Futurama does a better job of starting the story from the beginning, whereas Rick and Morty is throwing us into the middle of an ongoing dynamic. The adventure Rick and Morty go on is fun, but mostly unnecessary, which is how each episode normally goes. Whereas for the pilot of Futurama, the story comes from the character, as they've established that Fry hated his old life and now has every motivation to not fall into the same situation again. So although it is close, Futurama narrowly wins for me. Next is the alternative sketch episodes, so it's the anthologies of interest versus interdimensional cable. Both shows basically set up a window into an alternative reality. The difference being that for Futurama, yet again, the story always comes from the character, so their alternatives are about taking a character's key trait and then highlighting it in a different way. What if someone as destructive as Bender was 500 feet tall or human? What if Leela was a little more impulsive or found her true home? What if Fry never came to the future, or his skills of playing video games were required to save the planet? All of these alternatives help to expand our understanding of the character and allow the writers to write the types of jokes they could never cram into a normal episode. For Rick and Morty, their alternatives are more like a series of quick sketches that could be viewed as a sci-fi version of Family Guy. However, unlike Futurama, which constrains its gags to the story, here there are so many creative possibilities one after the other that the viewer is bound to enjoy at least some of them. In terms of storytelling, the cable sketches don't give us much great insight into the characters. However, they always do provide an unfolding B-story in the background that adds a layer to the episode. Whether it's Jerry and Beth examining how their lives could have been different if they never married, or Jerry being asked to offer up his genitals to save the most important leader in the universe. Given the real goal of these episodes is just to provide a fun, wacky alternative to the normal style of the show, I think Rick and Morty earns the point for its more consistent creativity. Now you could say that Futurama has better traditional writing, as they do cram in 3 complete stories in a short space of time, but Rick and Morty's individual sketches are so shocking that I find they tend to stick with you longer. Next up is a classic sci-fi trope, time travel. While Rick Sanchez regularly travels to different planets and dimensions, traditional time travel isn't really his thing. Sure, he has episodes of traveling through his old memories and even dreams, but in terms of actual time travel, Rick and Morty leaves a lot to be desired. Perhaps this is because in this narrative universe, there are so many different timelines that it's hard for the writers to overly invest in one really mattering. But in Rattlestar Ricklactica, by trying to do the right thing, Morty accidentally inspires a snake planet to discover time travel, which they then use to come back in time to kill him. So Rick has to go back in time even further to help the snakes discover time travel even earlier, so they overuse it and the time police have to intervene. It's not a bad episode, but I don't think it holds a candle to Futurama's Roswell That Ends Well, where the crew accidentally time travel back to New Mexico when Fry lazily tosses a metal popcorn pan in the microwave during a supernova. This is a fun way to explain the mystery of what really happened in Roswell in 1947 when the US military discovered Bender and Zoidberg. The episode is filled with hilarious jokes from start to finish, including Fry accidentally killing his own grandpa despite doing everything in his power not to, before ultimately sleeping with his grandmother and becoming his own grandfather. Additionally, Futurama also has another strong time travel episode, The Late Philip J. Fry, in which Fry can't be late for a birthday dinner with Leela, but then he, Bender, and the Professor accidentally time travel too far into the future and then have to continue until the end of time before circling back around to the moment before they left. Meaning the show gets to explore what the very beginning and end of time on this planet might look like before cleverly closing the time travel paradox by crushing themselves in the next timeline. So without a doubt, the time travel point has to go to Futurama, as not only is their use of this trope more creative, but it also says a lot more about the characters and ignites storylines that become more relevant later. Next up are simulations. Until the latest season on Hulu, Futurama hadn't really toyed around with simulations too much. But then in the latest episode, the crew watched the professor's block animation simulation of their own reality. This causes the crew to question if they too are living in a simulation, as how would they ever know if they were? And this is a key difference between both shows. Futurama tends to just take one concept, explain it, and gradually explore it in a pretty educational way. Whereas Rick and Morty merely explains as it goes, but always thrusts the viewer and the characters straight into a predicament first. So rather than asking, what if we were living in a simulation, or explaining what a simulation even is, Rick, Morty, and Jerry just wake up living in one, and only Rick notices. Not only is the episode intelligent in its execution, but having the B story be Jerry obliviously thriving in this obviously fake, simulated world is a stroke of genius, as he somehow manages to make all his dreams come true, and then due to his crippling self-doubt, takes it all away, highlighting the character's instinct to self-sabotage even when the world is working in his favour. So Futurama unfolds in a more traditional way. It flows from A to B to C, expanding its scope with the viewer's understanding of the concept, meaning it dedicates its whole episode to truly dealing with this scientific topic. Whereas Rick and Morty prioritizes the pace of its storytelling, and reveals information in an unexpected fun way. They're not explaining, but demonstrating what it's like to be in a simulation, assuming the audience is smart enough to catch up before the next twist and turn. So for me, Rick and Morty takes the point, as their episode is far funnier and more memorable than Futurama's educational approach. Then we come to a classic sci-fi trope, the fantastic voyage, in which characters are shrunk down to a microscopic level to venture into a human body. But both shows tackle this familiar storyline slightly differently. For Rick and Morty, it's only Morty who's forced to travel inside the body of a homeless Santa on Christmas Day, whereas in Futurama, the entire crew travel inside Fry while Leela distracts him. This gives Futurama more comedic bandwidth, as the audience already knows all the characters, whereas Rick and Morty is introducing a whole crew of new characters that are completely disposable. In terms of plot, Morty is there to save this homeless Santa's life from various diseases, as Rick has built a microscopic theme park inside him that he wants to protect. It's a fun episode that plays with the cliches of the genre, but in my view it falls short because it ultimately doesn't really mean anything. Whereas in Futurama's plot, the crew enter Fry's body to extinguish the superworms he's accidentally consumed. But by spending time with Fry, Leela discovers they're actually making him stronger and smarter, to the point he's unexpectedly become the man of her dreams. So as a narrative twist, she now goes inside him to stop the crew from undoing this miracle. Now on paper, both Fry and Leela have what they want. But Fry only wants love if it's authentic, and he can't tell if Leela really loves him or the worms. So he chooses to shrink himself down and get rid of the worms himself. So although the story began from something as silly as Fry eating an old truck stop toilet sandwich as a means of playing out this fun sci-fi trope, beneath the surface it's really an episode about conditional love that develops Fry and Leela's relationship. This makes it not just a fun episode with great twists and turns, but one that's actually pivotal to the ongoing story arc of the show. Needless to say, the point goes to Futurama. Next up is multiverses, and there's no denying that Rick and Morty hold a clear advantage in this arena, as it's a consistent through-line of the show. Futurama's The Farnsworth Parabox is its one strong episode about multiverses, in which the professor creates a box that contains a near-identical universe to their own. Except in this universe, the result of coin flips always go the opposite way. But this alternate crew also possess a box containing the original crew's universe, leading to a multi-dimensional chase through different universes. It's a fun episode, but again, Futurama tends to follow the same structure of discovering something, explaining it, and then in a fun educational way, expanding the viewer's understanding of the topic before closing out the episode. Whereas Rick and Morty uses multiverses as a mere setup to create unique storylines. It's initially introduced as an emergency solution when Morty screws up their original universe too much, and Rick teleports them into their new reality, crushing their alternative selves and burying their bodies in the backyard. This then expands at the end of the first season when the main duo are arrested by the Council of Ricks, where it's revealed there are thousands upon thousands of different Ricks and Mortys from different dimensions. And this dimension has its own political system, its own police force, its own everything. So again, this is the difference between explaining and exploring a concept and demonstrating a concept by writing a story within it. Futurama keeps us on the outside looking in. There's a distance between the concept and the show, whereas Rick and Morty blurs that line. It has many episodes where multiverses are just a regular part of the plot that almost require no explanation, as the audience clearly understand the rules of this universe well enough already. So the multiverse point has to go to Rick and Morty, making it even in this category 3-3 apiece, going into the final comparison, freezing time. To me, these episodes really exemplify where these shows differ stylistically. In Futurama's Meanwhile, the professor reveals his new time device that sends the entire universe 10 seconds into the past unless you're in the protective time shelter. So Fry uses this device to have fun and steal an engagement ring before he proposes to Leela, telling her to meet him at the top of the Vampire State Building at 6:30 if her answer is yes, or to not show up at all if she's rejecting him. It then seems as if Leela is a no-show, so Fry decides he doesn't want to live anymore and jumps off the building, only to see her arriving before he splats on the ground. Realizing his watch is fast, as he has been sending the universe back 10 seconds so often, he pushes the button again, trapping himself in an endless loop of falling from the tower to the ground over and over. So when Leela tries to break the cycle, they accidentally freeze time for everyone except for Fry and Leela. And now they get to spend their entire lives just with each other, exploring the world around them like no one else matters. Which is a beautiful metaphor for what a good marriage is, sharing your life with one other person as if they're your entire universe. So yet again, the Futurama writers took a sci-fi trope like freezing time and used it to complete the romantic arc they've been developing for years. Whereas if we look at how Rick and Morty handles two similar concepts, it plays out very differently. In A Wrinkle in Time, when Rick freezes time so they can clean up the house after a party, he accidentally splits their present timeline in two. So now we have two near identical timelines that need to sync up by behaving more predictably. Even just visually, the split-screen storytelling here is a fresh new way of demonstrating a concept. And as the timeline splits into more and more fractions, the various Ricks all turn on one another and try to be the lone survivor until the time police intervene. The major difference here is that for the Rick and Morty writers, the concept of freezing or splitting time is a purely intellectual exercise. They're focused on what makes logical sense for the characters to think, do, or suspect next. Whereas if this was an episode of Futurama, their writers would instead find a way for the timelines to all sync up by discovering something they're all united on. But despite the show's cold and nihilistic tone, the Rick and Morty writers can do emotional storytelling when they want to, and this example is still related to the same concept as Futurama's Meanwhile. In the Vat of Acid episode, Rick gives Morty a redo device which allows him to save a location in time like a video game, and simply redo his life from there whenever he wants. Morty is constantly pushing the button to avoid making mistakes, but then he meets the love of his life and they begin a beautiful linear story together that makes him completely forget about ever pushing the redo button again as he's living in the moment. Unexpectedly, the two are in a horrifying plane crash, and he has to heroically save their lives from freezing and starving to death. He somehow overcomes all these odds with no help, and the couple are stronger than ever. Only for Jerry to accidentally pick up the redo device instead of the TV remote and send Morty back to the moment before he ever met her. Devastated by losing the life story he worked so hard to build, he races over to her, acting far too familiar, and she pepper sprays him in the face. So he keeps pushing the button over and over, sending him back to the moment she sprays him again and again, no longer having any access to the woman of his dreams. This highlights the major difference between the two shows' ethos. Futurama is about finding a way for love to conquer all, But Rick and Morty is about finding a way to have found love, lost it, and never be able to get it back. It's about giving you a chip on your shoulder, a justifiable reason to be cynical, as this universe is often cruel. Now, neither message is entirely right or entirely wrong. They're just contrasting ends of the spectrum, the yin to each other's yang. But if I have to pick the final winning point, I'm going to go with Futurama, as yet again they found a way to tie the emotional to the intellectual, and somehow harmonise the two, wrapping up the series in a satisfying way. This narrowly makes Futurama my overall winner, which feels right to me, as I do have my childhood biases that I told you about earlier. But genuinely, if I could only recommend one of these shows for someone to watch, I feel most people would gain more from Futurama as an overall experience than Rick and Morty, which does have some incredible episodes, creative storytelling, and many laugh-out-loud moments, but is just missing that human touch that makes it all mean something when you put it all together. However, despite my objective criteria, that's just my subjective opinion. So which show do you think takes the top spot, and why? Do you find Rick and Morty's cynicism more realistic and appealing, or do you just think Futurama is far funnier? Let me know in the comments section. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.